Okay, hi everybody. I've got my cue from Olivia, so I will start. Welcome everyone. I'm Rana Jawad. I convene the MENA Social Policy Network and very pleased to be collaborating with a whole range of colleagues as part of a project that started last year called roughly focusing on the linkages between social protection and conflict prevention in the MENA region. And this is a project that's funded by the Global Research Challenges Fund, which is part of the UK's overseas official development assistance budget and funded through the Arts and Humanities Research Council. So that broadly reflects the acronyms that you can see on the front slide there for the presentation today. Thank you so much for joining us for this information event. We're going to try and relay some really key information, hopefully not too much information that you will find useful, which is specifically related to a research fund that we will be managing as part of this project. So thank you so much, and we will get going. Next slide, please, Olivia. Okay, so I've made introductions about myself. So I don't know, I recognize some names and it's nice that everybody's made time to connect. Please do spread the word, especially if you find information about this research fund useful. We are thinking very broadly about the connections between social protection, social policy, and also conflict prevention. And so hopefully the word will spread widely and feel free to pass that message on. So just a quick overview in terms of where the research fund sits. I've introduced broadly the project, which is a Network Plus project, and we're doing a range of knowledge development, but also capacity building activities, focusing specifically on these sort of concepts of security, social equality, and social protection in the MENA region. Yeah, so in a way, we're kind of trying to rethink causes and dynamics of conflict and linkages to peace. Yeah, so rather than talk about conflict in the MENA region, maybe we can start to talk about peace in the MENA region, but acknowledging that that peace is uneasy and complex, and then trying to understand how social protection fits into that. The fund is available to both researchers and practitioners, and there's a range of amounts that we will be commissioning specifically for research projects where the aim is to produce new knowledge. Roughly speaking, the amount will be between 10,000 and 50,000, and we'll talk a bit more about these during the course of the slides. And then we're also very keen to commission projects that at the moment we're calling applied intervention and knowledge exchange projects. And again, we will explain what these are as we go along. And the amount for these is a little bit smaller, as you can see on the screen. The countries of focus are very much the Arab countries of the southern Mediterranean, as it were, countries that are either experiencing conflict or neighboring a country in conflict. So you can see on the screen there the countries that we are primarily interested in. But we're also very keen to encourage interdisciplinary and international collaborations. So we very much welcome applications that include a non-MENA country or a non-social science perspective as well. Thank you. Next slide, please. A bit of a brief background in terms of the wider project within which this research fund sits. You can see some sort of key aims there. The first one being to promote interdisciplinary research on social policy and social protection that feeds directly into improving policy practice and knowledge about the causes of conflict and conflict prevention. This is a very sort of practical agenda, so we value very much the development of new knowledge and or a reconceptualization of existing understandings, but equally there's a very sort of strong impact agenda, as it were, and we want to make sure that through the funding that we're providing and through the research that we're promoting, we are able to translate that into practical action wherever we can in terms of reaching policymakers, reaching civil society actors, reaching business groups, not just in terms of changing their ideas, but also in terms of potentially changing their behaviors and practices and attitudes. So we very much encourage this spirit in the research fund that we are talking about today. Some sort of couple of key principles that it's important to share with you all is that we very actively believe in knowledge being widespread, universal, and can emerge from any quarter of the world. And in this sense, we're very committed to promoting an equitable North-South collaboration wherever possible. And in this sense, the fund is open to all interested applicants from across the world. And as much as possible, we do want to try to encourage collaborations as well, certainly between the UK and colleagues that are based outside of the UK. And finally, this fund, of course, fits in with all of these aims. Thank you, Olivia. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've identified some key themes that we would like the research fund to focus on. So anyone interested in applying, we're encouraging you please to engage with at least one of the main research questions that have been identified for the overall project that the fund is located in. I'm not going to read them all out. This meeting is recorded, and of course the information provided here is going to be publicly available and through social media platforms. But we strongly encourage applicants to connect with the research questions that we've identified for this project that broadly explore, as you can see there, causal relationships. So for example, how and why social welfare and social injustice may lead to violence and conflict, broadly defined, whether we're thinking in terms of war or we're thinking in terms of social inequality and issues of structural violence rather than all-out war. We're also interested in issues of meaning and design. So for example, how might a social policy perspective enhance or add to the prevailing international approaches to conflict prevention and peace building? Very interested also in the question of political will. How do we get policy actors committed to this agenda? How do we get them to mobilize resources around social protection so that we can enhance conflict prevention activities? Next slide, please. Two more questions we're interested in are at the more practical level, questions of effectiveness and institutionalization. So again, really tapping into the ways in which the design and the implementation of policies can actually lead to capacity building or can actually improve systems of governance. Equally, how do we institutionalize these efforts? So as you can see, some very practical questions that we're interested in. Of course, you may have your own research questions that you want to focus on, and we welcome that innovation. But as far as possible, we'd like, please, for you to connect your research questions to the focus that we've already set. Thank you. We're also, and just trying to give as much indication of what we're interested in, there are some priority research areas that we've pre-identified. This doesn't mean that this is only what we're interested in, but again, this might speak to you, so you can see them on the slides there. And as far as possible, this is just to encourage colleagues to think in the direction that we'd like to encourage you in. And of course, you're more than welcome to connect your own interests. So as you can see, historical mechanisms of wealth redistribution, we've identified gaps in the literature, in the study of conflict, and the nature of peace in the MENA region, perceptions and processes of social and economic inequality. So we're very interested in those subjective perceptions rather than, if you like, the more elite or macro level of political settlements where we're arguing some of the conflict prevention literature currently resides, and hence this focus on social grievances. Another interesting area we'd like to encourage is sort of more, you may consider this quantitative, but equally it may be qualitative in approach. So measurements of state agency and fragility, mechanisms of policy learning as well for social policy governance. So a whole range of ideas there. And of course, you know, we've got to just acknowledge that the COVID-19 pandemic has sort of changed the policy landscape globally, and the extent to which you'd like to engage with that is also welcome. Thank you, Olivia. Yeah, so last few slides for me. In terms of the projects that we are interested in commissioning, we've tried to keep this quite broad and as flexible as possible. On the one hand, there are two types of projects that we're happy to fund. So straightforward research projects that seek to advance scholarship and build new knowledge. The minimum amount for this is set at £10,000, and we can fund up to £50,000. The length of time of these projects would be somewhere between 6 months and 12 months. So these are not massive projects to begin with for a range of reasons, and we can explain this a bit more in the Q&A if anyone's curious. But these are medium-sized projects, if you like, that hopefully will be able to produce important insights in the next year. And I should add that we're hoping to try to work with researchers who make progress in this regard to try and synthesize some of the findings to feed into other activities that we are developing, such as an e-learning course on conflict prevention and social protection in the MENA region. So successful applicants would hopefully work with us to help synthesize some of their results to integrate into this legacy output. Thank you. Next slide, please, Olivia. And then the second type of project is more the sort of capacity building, knowledge exchange. These are smaller projects. You can see the minimum and sort of maximum amounts, as it were, and the length of time there. And we'll say a bit more about the examples of these in the next few slides. But I think the key thing to mention is that these are projects that are aiming to do some kind of knowledge exchange, capacity building, collaboration across different sectors. And the idea here is that we're linking research and knowledge production with key policy and practice challenges in the MENA region. So please, Olivia, the next slide. Thank you. So some specific examples you can see there. So we've got policy labs. I mean, I don't know if anybody's familiar with the policy labs that the MENASP network has been doing, and we've got colleagues within the network and I'm sure elsewhere who are engaged with policy labs in different scenarios, you know. So just to mention that this is an interesting forum we're happy to explore further. Evidence-based dialogues and platforms, training and capacity building activities, the piloting of policies, the more creative side of exhibitions, and we're very broad. So in that sense, if applicants have sort of interest in bringing together the arts, the creative performances, or in any kind of sort of artistic output, then this would be welcome. And in that sense, you know, we're happy to look at applications of this sort, and as well as our focus on policy change and policy capacity building. Thank you, Nick. Yeah, that's great. So that's all from me.
Thanks, Rana. So hi, everybody. I'm Olivia Perry. I'm the network manager for the MENASP network. And I just want to quickly run through the eligibility criteria and application process. So hopefully this will help you know whether you can apply for it. And we've tried to keep it as broad as possible, but it's within the HRC GCRF sort of framework. So these are kind of rules based on them as well. Sorry, this clicker is slow. There we go. So I won't go through all of them as with Rana. We're just going to provide this PowerPoint at the end, but some of the key kind of eligibility points are that the main thing is that it contributes to the core aims of MENASP-CP, of that it fits in with that agenda of advancing kind of social policy and conflict prevention, evidence making and knowledge sharing in focusing on the Middle East and North Africa. But we are encouraging sort of comparative work, as Rana mentioned. Unfortunately for this, we could only do all communication in English. In time, we may be able to include other languages, but for the first fund call, we're focusing on English. So that's the application form, due diligence, and all reporting will be done in English, and we can help support with that. There's a project limits of between 3 and 12 months. And as we said at the beginning, this is about sort of collaborations between the UK and MENA and beyond. So partnerships are encouraged, but it's not required to have a UK investigator on your project. But they do need to be led or have a partnership with a country from the DAC, so that's Development Assistance Community, with a preference for the MENA countries. And you can act as a co-investigator on multiple applications or a support applicant on multiple applications, but you can only be the lead applicant or principal investigator on one application. And you've seen the budget ranges before, but just to remind you that there's funding for between £10,000 and £50,000 for the research projects, and then £5,000 and £15,000 for the applied intervention and knowledge exchange projects. Secondly, we are encouraging applications from all sort of areas, from academic institutions, from research organisations, from non-academic organisations. That includes NGOs, government agencies, local community organisations. And just to be aware that all applicants will go through a due diligence process, as well as ethics and safeguarding review. And that may include a full ethics approval process. We're encouraging applications to be ODA compliant, and for projects over £30,000, there's a ODA compliance statement that they need to complete as part of the application form. And then for the final point, just to explain this, that any UK-based organisations are expected to contribute to 20% of the overall budget for their contributions for their work. And then any low or middle income country-led applications are eligible for 100% of the costs. If you need further clarity on that, you can ask us about that separately or afterwards, and we'll be happy to explain that more fully. And then on top of the eligibility, we've just added things that will help make your application stand out. So we're looking for innovative projects. This could be anything to do with, sort of a new policy idea or new way to encourage engagement and collaboration within the policy or research spaces. Interdisciplinarity is a big thing within this project. We really want to draw on different academic disciplines and wider kind of disciplines to show that these kind of topics, the social policy and conflict prevention topics, are all related across different groups and can be shared through different mediums. And then also it may be important to touch on COVID-19 and the impact that's having, not just in the region, but more broadly, but with specific focus on the region. And then just to show you the application process, so there's 3 stages. There's the pre-application and application process, which is in blue. We've got the information event, and then we'll be kind of giving you an indication of when call for applications may come out, but that's still unknown to us. It's related to a number of factors. You'll have an application deadline, which will be 6 weeks from the call for applications. Thereabouts at least 6 weeks, but it may be up to 8 weeks. It'll go through a peer review process, and then we'll inform all applicants of whether they've been successful. At this stage, then you'll go into the due diligence stage, where we'll do an ethics and safeguarding interview with you and review and explain what process of ethics you'll go through, which my colleague Rachel will touch on shortly. Then we'll do due diligence in terms of your organisation or individual capacity to meet the project. Finally, you'll get your ethics approval, contract signed, and the final work plan agreed. And then project start, we expect quarterly reporting until the project ends, and a final report after that. And I'll hand over to Rachel now for ethics and safeguarding.
Okay, thank you very much, Olivia and Rana, and welcome everybody to this launch of our funding call. We're very excited and hope that we have already whetted your appetite to think about applying for funding for your, I'm sure, very interesting and justifiable projects. So as with any activity that we do in terms of research or indeed knowledge exchange activities, then we do have to think about ethics and safeguarding. And so this is a fundamental and very important part of the whole process that you will go through. I'm just going to talk about really the application stage at the moment and what kinds of things we would be looking for. So next slide, please, Olivia. Okay, so of course it is important for good commissioning. Evidence-based decisions must be based on research that is both methodologically and ethically robust. And so in order to for our research to be applied and to be justifiable, then we need, and we hope that policy will change as a result of the outcomes of our research and the findings, then that evidence base has to be methodologically and ethically robust. And so ethics and safeguarding are fundamental components of all proposals. And if you are going to apply, then you must have considered ethics really throughout the activity. Of course, at the application stage, you'll be asked to answer a couple of questions about ethics, but that's not where it ends. You may have to go for ethical review, depending on what type of project or research or activity you're going to do. And indeed, all the way through, ethics is important in terms of dissemination and what happens, the legacy that we have of those projects. So we go by the 4 ethical principles: that's autonomy, or the right for any research participant to make their own choice about being participants, and that links to informed consent. Beneficence, acting with the best interest of those participants. Non-maleficence, above all, you're not doing any harm in terms of the research or the activities that we do, and whether or not our project is fair and it's justifiable, but also in terms of the benefits for who is it benefiting, and is it equal? So for example, if there's an intervention, then who is going to get that intervention, and who is going to be excluded, and why is that? And there may be very good ethical reasons for that, but we need to know why. Safeguarding also against exploitation, and that could mean psychological as well as physical abuse or harassment of research participants. And also included in here is inducement, to inducing participants to be part of our projects. Thinking about the communities and the risks that may be put on those communities. Are they just too much? Can we justify them? What about gatekeepers? And also looking after researchers, looking after ourselves, but also looking after the interests of those that we work with and anybody in our team. So really, those are the kind of ethics and safeguarding that we think about. Next slide, please, Olivia. Okay, so on the application form then, there are just 2 research ethics questions at this stage. The first one is, what are the likely key ethical issues you will face, and broadly, how will they be managed? So examples of those ethical issues may include, as I say, informed consent. How are you going to get consent from individuals maybe who cannot read, who cannot write? There's various ways that you can maybe get informed consent, for example, recording people saying that they're happy to participate. But these things have to be thought about before you go into the field and before you actually apply for this funding. Voluntariness, are people actually willingly volunteering to be participants in your research project or your activity? Is there any risk of physical, psychological, or emotional harm, and what will you do to minimize that risk? There may well be some risks, and of course, we can't always anticipate what's going to happen in the field when we're there, but of course we can maybe mitigate some of those, and if we've thought about it beforehand, we can certainly minimize those risks to people. Privacy, confidentiality, anonymity, and above all, I guess, what encapsulates all of these things is dignity of the actual person themselves. So those are very broadly in terms of what you might be thinking about in terms of answering that particular question. And then secondly, what ethics and governance approvals will be required, and what is your timetable to obtain them? Well, for some people in some countries, their organisation will actually provide favourable ethical opinions. They'll do the ethical review for them. It might be an institution, it might be university, it might be a broader government institution. For other people that don't have that, you will need to go through the University of Bath ethics process, and we will be able to take you through that. So we just really want to know on the application form, A, what are some of the key ethical issues you might face, and broadly, how will they be managed? And secondly, what ethics and governance approvals do you think will be required? So you might need to do a bit of research and find out what ethical approvals you might need. And if you don't have those, then I say you can go through Bath research ethical review process. And also, what's your timetable to obtain those? And if, any good researcher will have a timetable for what they're going to do. And of course, ethics sometimes does take a little bit longer than you might think. So be generous with your time in terms of the timetable and be realistic. Next slide, please. Okay, so in order to help you before and during your application stage, and when you're thinking about this application, we're preparing a PowerPoint presentation. That will be a PowerPoint presentation by myself. It'll be a recorded presentation. I'll be going through in that presentation some of the main ethical issues that I've talked about here and some others as well. So I will be taking you through that, but of course, every project is different, and you will have to start thinking now about the ethical issues of your particular research or your particular activity. As part of that presentation, I'm doing some in conversations with various colleagues, commissioning members who have been doing research for a long period of time, some 20, 30 years, and have come across a whole range of particular ethical issues that have been specific to their countries or to their locations, to their regions, to the population that they are actually doing the research with. And so that's hopefully will be very, very useful to you, because they'll be reflecting on some of the issues that they've had. So these are real life case studies, if you like, and I will be talking those through with those individuals. So we hope that this novel kind of approach to ethics training will really help you think about ethics, be mindful of ethics when you're actually writing that proposal. Next slide, please. Okay, and then once, if you are successful, and let's hope that you are, and you get your funding and it's all kind of being signed off, then there will be, ethics doesn't just end there. There will be an ethics meeting, initial ethics meeting, to plan and appropriate requirements for your ethical review, and that will be mainly done by my colleague, Professor Joe Devine, who is a professor of global development, and he's had a lot of experience of being in the field, and so he'll be able to go with you and sort of mentor you, and there'll be other colleagues as well that will be able to help you. So for the successful applicants requiring ethical review, and normally any project that involves humans will require ethical review, so you'll either provide evidence of a favourable ethical opinion, or in other words, sometimes use approval from your country or your organisation, and you will also need to fill out a form from the University of Bath, the Social Science Research Ethics form, including a data management plan. But we will talk you through all of that. You'll then send all that documentation, apart from participant information sheets or consent forms, directly to the Bath Social Science Research Ethics Committee, or SHREC, and Chair's Action, because you've already had your favourable ethical approval from your country. And so then it'll just be more or less a formality, but just because of audit, then Bath Ethics Chair will go through it. If you haven't had prior ethical approval, then again, prior to going out into the field, you will fill out the full Bath SHREC forms and send to our Bath SHREC Committee for Ethical Review. And again, we'll help you through that. So that's really encapsulates the ethics review process. It's not as scary as it maybe looks at the moment. It's fairly straightforward. It's all been discussed at Bath, and everybody's waiting, and they all know what to expect. And so it should be fairly smooth, and you will then get to hear whether or not you have a favourable ethical opinion. There might be some tweaks and you might have to go back, but normally, given the amount of support that you're going to get from the team, we hope that this stage of it will go well through and fairly smoothly. And so that program of research and knowledge exchange ethics training that I'm talking to you about the kind of mentoring one-to-one support, will come out at a later date, given those successful applicants. Next slide, please, Olivia. And I think that's me done. So thank you very much, and thank you for listening. And I look forward to seeing your applications. Thank you.
Hi, shall I start? Okay, I thought I'll be given a green light. Yes, thank you, Rachel, and hi everyone. Nice to have so many of our colleagues here. Basically, I am supposed to take a couple of minutes to talk about some good tips on writing a good research application. As you would understand, that there is a lot that can be said on the subject, so I don't plan on spending the next 4 hours talking about how to write a good application, and I don't claim to be an expert on the subject. So when I thought about if somebody came to me and said how would you propose that we write a good application, so I thought I would share my own experience. So throughout the years, while I've worked on several applications in these years, I have benefited a lot from some of the really good resources online. So I thought it would be useful for you if you would like to have a look at them. And so I thought I would share them with you. So Olivia, next slide, please. So these are some of the resources that have come in very handy. I have made sure that I do not disseminate or share resources that are more for physical sciences, or engineering or whatever. So these are more tailored generally towards social sciences. I really like that article in the Nature Journal that talks about this professor at Deakin University who gives her experience of winning, I think, around $32 million in the last 20 years. And those tips that she gives are really helpful. And one key point that article raises, and that I found really useful myself, is that there's never going to be, a perfect application. And this professor, Kylie Ball, talks about a Nobel Prize winner who the day they were told that they won the Nobel Prize in physics, was also the day when one of their major grant applications was rejected. So basically, the idea is that, we try our best, but we cannot, think that we'll tick all the boxes. So yes, some of the really good links. The Wellcome Trust is very much a step-by-step guide. Same is the ESRC. So you might find them useful. Talking about the specifics, I would like to, again, share a couple of useful points that I learned from really good colleagues who helped me in the beginner stages. One key point that I learned was that you should try to put yourself in the shoes of a reviewer and see how a reviewer will see your application. And that means two things, basically. One thing is that when we talk about a reviewer, that might be a person who is not an expert in your field. So see your document, your application from the eyes of somebody who might not be a key expert in that area, and see if they looked at it, how will they understand it, or to what extent, they will understand it. So being a non-expert and what. And secondly, if you put yourself in the shoes of a reviewer, then you will be able to look at the totality of the project in one go. So you will see how different components fit together and how, if one component is not really fitting together, or if you take out that component and the project still keeps standing, that means the component is not doing its job really well or as well. So it can be taken out basically. So ideally, if one component or one piece of the puzzle is taken out, the whole project should collapse. That is how a well-integrated application, I would think, looks like. So if anything you take out and it still keeps standing, I think then there is something that part of the project is not doing that well. So that was my first point. And that again, some colleagues gave to me as a tip in the many years ago. And the second point that I would like to mention here is that quite a few of us are now increasingly reaching out to external partners and bringing in external stakeholders and weaving them into our designs and making them part of the stakeholders of the project. Or quite often we have policy related audiences or policy related researchers, and we want to have an impact in the policy world. So instead of trying to bring them towards the end of your thinking or building of the project, try to do it from the very beginning. So take your policy audiences or any partners or any stakeholders or anybody who is a non-academic partner, try to weave them in from the very beginning, because that will ensure, if you weave them in from the very beginning, that will ensure that you will build a strong foundation for impact from the word go. You will know that what is really essential from the very beginning, instead of adding them at the end, and then the whole project would be constructed without their feedback or without their being involved in the process. So stakeholders are important. We are all increasingly bringing them in, but having them from the very beginning is more important than bringing them in at the last minute at the later stage. But these are I thought some of the key points that I can mention. Any questions, I'll be very happy to answer. And our colleagues, Mar and Nicola, sorry, my cat is very nosy, sorry. So yeah, that's all from me, but I'm happy for my colleagues too. Mar?
Thank you, Wally. Thank you very much. I love yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, can you all hear me? Okay, because my internet is a little bit unstable today. Following on your steps, Wally, what I would like to add is, from the perspective, I work now for a Jordanian NGO, Arab Renaissance for Democracy and Development, and I've been working on program development for the past 6 years. And as you said, I think a very useful advice is put yourself on the reviewer's shoes and see how are they going to look at. From an NGO perspective, one of the things that I think it's extremely useful is, who is your organization? In order to make a robust application, you need to let the reviewers know who is your organization, what is the experience in the field that you have had, because these are small projects, very focused. So the reviewer needs to know how feasible is the project, the innovative project that you are proposing is going to be. So this is one of the key points. What's the work in the field that you've been doing? This is not the length of this project doesn't allow to experiment, to pilot, but rather, or it could be actually a pilot, but building on work that has been done. So what's the type of work that relates to the objectives of the grant that you have been working on? And now, how are you going to work on this objective of knowledge exchange and partnership and interdisciplinarity that this grant is proposing? And then the capacities, the organizational capacities that you are bringing in. As Wally was mentioning, bring the partners that you work with to the forefront. Who have you been networking? What are your different, the different organizations, networks that you've been working on for the past years and now, or that you also want to bring along because you've been in conversations, etc. This is the type of information that needs to be highlighted to make it very strong and get the reviewer know who is your organization really and how feasible is the action that you are proposing. And a final point from a very organizational point of view is the approvals time. As our colleague Rachel was mentioning, there's a lengthy process. And when it comes to organizations, there are, in the case of Jordan particularly, there are government approvals that need to be in place. You don't have to have government approvals when you do the application, but you need to estimate how feasible it would be for you to get the application and how long it will take for that approval to happen. If it's in the case of Jordan, for instance, the process can be from weeks to months, but there's a feasibility that every organization understands how feasible the project is according and will receive the government's approval. This is extremely key. This is another point that I would like to emphasize. Thank you. That's all from my side.
Thank you, Ma and Wally, for those points. So I just really want to briefly go through the expected timeline of the call, and this is very much dependent on the UKRI, the AHRC, GCRF sign off. So we've got the information event now. Applications, we're expecting them to open late summer. We can't be more specific than that, and we don't want to promise that it will be late summer, but it should be coming up in the next few months, shall we say, and then the applications will close 6 weeks after opening. But as soon as we can provide clearer deadlines and dates, we will do that as soon as possible to all that have attended and more widely. And then, as we said before, the outcome of the application will be provided within 3 to 5 weeks, and then we expect due diligence and ethical processes to take 1 to 2 months, but obviously depending on your institution's requirements or how much back and forth there is with ethics or with due diligence in turn, it may be longer or shorter than that. And then once that's all completed, we can do the project launch, and the project must end up to 12 months after that date. So some projects may be shorter and some may be the full 12 months. So like we said, please do note this is dependent on the funding available and the timeline provided by the UKRI, and anything above this, and as we've mentioned before, might be subject to change, but what our understanding is that it will go ahead as planned. Now we're going to make some time for questions and answers. I'm aware that we'll want to finish sharply at 2 p.m. because people have different meetings they have to go to from the participants and speakers. So any unanswered questions we will get to, and we'll send back the answers with this PowerPoint and the recording after the event. So please do be posting your questions in the chat box, or do raise a hand and we will try and get to you. So I'm going to pass over to Rana for the Q&A, and she can direct it to the different speakers, any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Olivia. Thanks, everyone. So I've got an eye on the chat, but I think colleagues, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question as well, if that's easier, and we can answer. So yeah, so open to your questions. Okay, so I can see a question from Nicola. Thanks, Nicola. Is secondary data analysis of an existing data set permissible? Yes, absolutely. So we're, in terms of sort of research and scholarship, we are following just the standard protocols and procedures that we would expect from any call, and that would be absolutely fine. Thank you. Question from Adam. How will the applications be assessed, and how long will review and feedback take? Okay, that may need to be responded to by various colleagues. So I'm going to have a go first at saying that there is a core commissioning team made up of the colleagues you've just seen here, but also additional colleagues who couldn't join us today. We are a mix of academics and practitioners. So each application will be sent to reviewers. And I know probably Rachel would need to come in at some point to explain a little bit more. But I'm sure you'll guess that some of the people involved in this core commissioning team are very seasoned UKRI and international reviewers. So we're going to try as far as we can to uphold those principles and follow those approaches. I think the key thing is to ensure that the applications are in line with the criteria that we will set out or that have been explained and that are relevant, if I may put it that way, to the focus that we've outlined. I'll be honest with you in saying that I don't think we've discussed yet the nitty-gritty of whether we're ranking applications and whether that will involve any kind of, numerical approach. But all of this will be made clear at the point of the formal launch of the call. And I think you can hopefully just expect more or less the kind of thing that you would expect from a typical UK research proposal. I'll stop there in case my colleagues would like to add anything. So anybody please from the team, from the commissioning team, if you'd like to add some more suggestions to Adam's question.
Yeah, just to say, Rana, that the application form is quite explicit. It has some explanatory notes after every question, so for clarity, so there should be no problem there about what we're really expecting on the application form. And indeed, there will be two levels of review in a sense. It will be each application will go out to review, and then there's a core commissioning group who will actually decide on in terms of which are successful and which aren't.
And I'll just add to that that any kind of conflict of interest that may be deemed to be so, anybody from the core team who's got a link to an application, they'll step out of that review process, and it will all be anonymized for the reviewers, so they'll just know the kind of core information of the project, so we can be as fair as possible to everybody.
Thanks. And thank you to Afshan's question. So could we say more about the 20% contribution expected from the UK side? Is that including contributions in kind, such as staff time, tools, materials? So that 20% contribution, that refers to the overhead costs of a UK institution where the applicant is based, who might be applying for research. The UKRI regulations are such that if the applicant is based in a UK university or organization, the 20% of their overhead costs, so specifically related to them as a staff member, have to be covered by their organization. So things like field work, travel, events organization, those can also be covered from the project, but I think there's different calculations. And so things like travel, I think you can put the full cost of the airfare, but something like an event, if there are catering costs and you are holding that event in the UK, then 20% of those costs have to be covered by your university, Bath. And then there's VAT considerations. We can always explain these in a bit more detail at the time of the call, and I'm sure if you are based in the UK, your organization would be able to advise you a bit more. I hope that's helpful, Afshan. I don't know if Olivia, you want to add any more, or any other informed colleague wishes to add on this question. Okay, thank you. I'll move on to another question by Moritz. Thank you, Moritz. So you mentioned that a UK partner researcher is encouraged but not necessary. Could you please elaborate on how important this is, how this would affect chances of getting funding if one does not have a UK partner or co-investigator? I mean, I believe I'm speaking in sort of a fairly well-informed manner, and I can say that it's really not necessary to have a UK partner. It's encouraged because we're trying to have, and UKRI explicitly wanted these collaborations. But you shouldn't worry about having that. If that is not an issue for you in the application that you're planning on putting in, then that's absolutely fine. I think if I may quickly add, the funding guidance for this process also come from the AHRC, who is the body funding this project. And so in that sense, if there are any changes that happen at that level, we'll make sure we communicate that to you as soon as possible. But that also means that we can only go by the information they've given us. And there have been some modifications to this funding guidance due to the current climate, and the cut in the UK's official development assistance has caused a lot of uncertainty around these GCRF projects. So that's why we're kind of doing things at a slower pace and at a sort of smaller scale. And this issue of having a UK partner was more important before, if I'm honest, but this isn't so important now. So as an applicant, please do not worry about having a UK collaborator if this isn't essential for your project. Thank you. Okay, I'll move on to another question. Can we have a case study, meaning a proposal focusing on one country? Yes, absolutely. Case study is very valuable, and just make sure, please, you justify the choice of that case study and what it can help us learn. Another question, will the application form be the full, excuse me, ESRC one? No, we've got our own application forms that we've developed incorporating guidance from the ESRC. I think we are moving towards just Word documents, not even an online application process. So hopefully trying to keep things straightforward. Okay, thanks to everyone who's thanking us. Another question, could you please confirm if I can apply for the call individually or not? Yes, so as an individual researcher, yes, you can apply. So that's absolutely fine. I mean, these are primarily, you need to be based in an institution. So if anybody has queries about this, please get in touch and we can advise. But yes, you can apply as a single applicant. So we've got a next point, excuse me, about fieldwork. Some countries have their borders still closed due to COVID-19 and for political calculations. Is working with other researchers or investigators on the ground possible / encouraged? So there's clearly ethical implications there, and I'm sure Rachel would want to come in on this. As a kind of broad headline, we're trying to promote research as normal, though we understand that in the climate that we're in, this may well be a combination of in-person and virtual field work. In some ways, this is an opportunity, and I hope this doesn't sound callous in any way. This is an opportunity for all of us to innovate, and we're kind of at the forefront of doing research in the era of the COVID pandemic. So I'm sure my colleagues in the commissioning team will support innovative fieldwork solutions from a conceptual point of view, but I think that there are ethical and safeguarding issues and to this question, and maybe Rachel, you'd like to come in, or other colleagues?
Yeah, that's fine, Rana. Obviously, yes, within the confines of the global situation, then we're all having to change some of our plans for research. And so working with other researchers or investigators on the ground is encouraged where you can, but I mean, obviously there are other ways of doing so. Those do raise ethical issues about inclusion and exclusion, because if somebody is in a region where there's no G3, never mind G4, you're not going to be doing Zoom interviews. And so, you know, all of these things have to be sort of thought through, and you have to adapt, and you have to say, well, you know, how are you going to do this, and how isn't it possible that you're going to do this, and so you're going to do it in a different way. Obviously, there's other ethical issues about when we do Zoom, focus groups and online, issues around privacy, around anonymity, all of that, and those have to be worked through. But, you know, we are doing that type of research. You know, that anything in a sense is possible. We've just got to think these things through. And so when you say fieldwork is a must for research, well, it depends what I mean, there may be projects where you're going to use big data and public data that's in the public domain, and there aren't necessarily big ethical issues with that, but it may be that you do research, that's the kind of research you want to do, and that's okay as well. So, you know, you don't have to actually do research where you're literally interviewing people, but this kind of call lends itself obviously to that type of research. Hope that helps.
Great, thanks, Rachel. Colleagues, yeah, please do interrupt me if anybody else wants to add to the answers. I'll just continue because I see there's a lot of messages. Thanks everyone for engaging. Thank you for all the thank you messages, all positive. Thank you so much. Oh, 1 minute to meeting end. Okay, I think that looks like it's everything. So thank you so much. I'm going to stop here. And just thank everyone for their participation and interest. And back to Olivia, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Rana, and thank you for all your questions. They'll be in the recording, but we'll also kind of note any down that need further clarification and provide those answers. So just briefly, as you go, just how to get involved with the network if you want to find out a bit more. So we do have an experts database, and that's of practitioners, academic researchers, policymakers interested in MENA or across the Middle East and North Africa. Do join that, because it may be that people after hearing this are interested in collaborations, and you'll be more visible on that database. We have a number of special issue collaboration opportunities coming up, so do contact us to hear more about that. There's an early career researchers forum, and you can find out more about that by subscribing to our quarterly newsletter and clicking ECR. We also have policy innovation case study series. So if you're interested in writing for that or the blog, then please do get in touch. And as always, you can subscribe to our mailing list, where we'll give you all the events updates, and you'll hear first the call for applications, as well as following us on social media to find out more. And if you've got any questions left at the end of this meeting, please do contact us on menasp_network@bath.ac.uk. So thank you everybody for coming. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to sharing the call with you in the coming months. So yeah, thank you for joining.
Take care. Bye everyone. Thank you.
Bye bye bye.
Bye everyone, all the best with your applications. Bye bye.
Hi everyone.